Welcome to the Enlightenment class. My name is Kurt Messick, and I will be your professor for this term, and I'm glad you're joining me. The Enlightenment is one of my favorite periods of philosophy, and I am very thrilled to be able to share it with so many people. Often when we have this class, there are only one or two people who enroll, so I'm really glad to have a group of people who can interact. One of the things to keep in mind about the Enlightenment is that it's not just a philosophical movement. I have here the portable Enlightenment reader, and one of the interesting things, of course, on the cover of that is that we have Benjamin Franklin on the cover, and Benjamin Franklin is holding onto the key that is on a line attached to a kite that's getting electricity, and of course it's actually showing the electricity in the painting there, because in many ways the Enlightenment is a shocking experience. The Enlightenment is something that bursts onto the scene in our modern philosophical and modern intellectual stage. And it doesn't just involve philosophy, it also involves science, it involves architecture, it involves politics, it involves a lot of different elements that really try to break away from dogmatism. Now, with regard to Europe, that means breaking away from the dogmatism both of the Catholic Church as well as different Protestant churches. At first, Protestant churches looked like they were part of the Enlightenment movement. At least some people like to sort of project the Enlightenment back onto the Protestant movement. But in fact, a lot of Protestant elements became just as dogmatically rigid in their newfound freedom as did the old Catholic dogmas with regard to philosophy, with regard to inquiry, with regard to a lot of other elements that really encapsulate what the Enlightenment is. That's not to say that these were narrow-minded peoples or peoples without any kind of insight. In fact, one of the interesting elements of science, one of the interesting elements of philosophy and political development is that, in fact, the church, being the Catholic Church and sometimes to a lesser extent the Anglican Church or the Lutheran Church, actually paid for a lot of the advancements that then turned against the church in different ways. So it just goes to show that no good deed goes unpunished sometimes, and that's what happened during the Enlightenment. But one of the things I invite you to do over the course of our class is to pay attention to the fact that the Enlightenment involves not just philosophy, but also things outside. And I'll bring out a few things that we have here in the Enlightenment reader. We have elements that include Isaac Newton. I don't have a particular thing for him in our class, but of course he is an Enlightenment figure, as well as Benjamin Franklin, not just for his scientific ideas, but also for philosophical ideas. We have people such as Voltaire and people such as Gibbon, who wrote the massive decline and fall of the Roman Empire. One of the things that the Enlightenment often did was try to hearken back to classical ideas, not just in terms of philosophy again, but also in architecture, in art, in civic pride, in civic duty, and being what constitutes a good citizen of the Republic. And of course that helps bring us into our modern political age when we can break away from elements such as medieval feudalism. Of course, if you want to start a fight among medievalists, just stand up and say the word feudalism and they'll break into camps and start fighting away. We can talk about some of those issues too, if you like, in our class. But there are different elements that come into play in terms of what art becomes. One of the things that the Enlightenment taps into quite a lot is the artistic ideas that came out of the Renaissance that include a rediscovery or a recovering of the idea that we can depict humanity and nature as it is, rather than simply as a stylized or ideal version of what it needs to be, or even some kind of prosaic or mosaic kind of way. So there are lots of different things that we can see in the Enlightenment that will guide us along the way. I'm going to take a snapshot and put it up in the class of a refrigerator magnet that I have on the principles of the Enlightenment. There aren't a lot of philosophically minded refrigerator magnets out there that in fact are serious. There are lots of ones that are rather joking. but this one is rather good. I tried to get it on our little video camera here, and it was very blurry, so I'm going to try to take a digital camera photograph of it and put it up there for you to see. For this week, in the discussion board, for the most part, I want you to introduce yourself as well as introduce yourself to the Enlightenment and introduce the Enlightenment to you. If you have taken ancient philosophy and medieval philosophy, wonderful, and you'll be able to trace some developments forward in the question that's in the discussion board on what makes the Enlightenment different. If not, do a little research. You're not required to take these courses in sequence, but of course sometimes it helps to have a comparison with what went before as to what's going on now. You have a few figures that I've highlighted for you this week. So look at them and see how they are making a break between old things and new things. Machiavelli, Francis Bacon, Hugo Grotius, and other people have made a decisive break in some ways from the philosophies that have gone before them, whether that be in terms of science, whether that be in terms of ethics and morals and justice, or in politics, or to a certain extent even in metaphysical authority. So do your best, do draw things out of the text as best you can. Don't be afraid to use outside sources, but I will hope that you will use the text of the course in addition to outside sources rather than instead of outside sources. That is an important feature of the class, that I be able to tell that you're actually doing the work of the class and not a different class. But I hope that as we go through, we will be able to enlighten each other.